Time to chat about the top news media earners, the top news media brands, talent, television, radio, with Jason Barrett, the president of Barrett Media. I'm Garrett Searight, the news media editor of Barrett Media. Talked about the sports yesterday with Dave Green, and now we'll talk about news media. And JB, before we get into our picks, your picks for the top 2024 news brands, talent, etc., anything that you'd like to address or get off your chest before we dive in too deeply into what happened in 2024?
Well, for starters, it was great to get a lot of feedback yesterday since the column went live. I wasn't sure if people were going to respond, given that we're in holiday mode and a lot of people check out for the new year. So, to those who reached out, thank you. The one thing I want to be crystal clear on, because I know there was a little bit of confusion, this is not the Barrett News Media Top 20. That comes out next week, January 6th through 10th. And then again, we'll do the stations on January 13th. These are my selections as somebody who monitors the business and listens to a lot of things and talks to a lot of people. So they're simply my predictions, my selections, one man's opinion. You could agree, disagree. That's all good. You could do your own list and we'll react to that too. But I just want to set the record straight that this is not the top 20 because we have a lot of people who vote in that process, and those results come out next week.
Yeah, so that we'll look forward to those coming out here in early January. But these are just JB's picks. So let's start with the news media brand of the year. There are a couple of really interesting, compelling, and you can make a case for all of them. But you chose Fox News. Tell me what put Fox News over the top in this category.
I mean, look, if you look at it from a sheer business perspective, 2024, they dominated the ratings. Their digital was outstanding. Their revenue is outstanding. I mean, look, we're in a year where an election was decided and it went the direction of the candidate who they supported. And so overall, I just think they've had the strongest shows from a revenue and ratings standpoint, and their digital and their streaming platforms have been outstanding. So, you can make a case. The Daily Wire did some great things this year. I mean, Matt Walsh's movie was a hit, Am I Racist? Which still a weird title, but very, very funny. If you saw some of those clips, they were entertaining. Outkick continues to grow, which is under the Fox brand. So if you want to reinforce Fox News, there's another argument for them, right? News Nation continued to build. Newsmax made some great progress this year. They're starting to see some wins on the rating side against CNN and MSNBC and some others. And so the New York Times has an overall outlet, very strong, and we'll touch on them later, NBC News as well. But to me, I just thought Fox had the strongest across all platforms, and that's why they got the nod.
Taking a look at the news media executive of the year, there really is a couple similar to the news brand of the year. There are a couple of good options, but Elon Musk takes home the news media executive of 2024.
I figured this one would get a couple of people scratching their head. So you could argue every year, Suzanne Scott at Fox News and Meredith Kopit Levian at the New York Times, Jeremy Boring at the Daily Wire, and Chris Ruddy at Newsmax also warrant consideration. But Elon Musk, and look, I'm a publisher, okay? I've got every reason to not love Elon because he doesn't love publishers. But how do you ignore what X's impact and influence was on the election? How do you ignore the amount of traffic and attention that the platform can Everybody likes to talk about the things that don't work on X. What they're not talking about is the massive size of X, the amount of creators who are now launching shows. I mean, Joe Rogan, his last deal with Spotify was just on Spotify. Remember that? Now his shows are on X and they're on YouTube, right? How many creators break news across X before they even go on their own networks? And so, look, I think overall, even though I can't stand some of the algorithm changes and how they've hurt us from a publishing standpoint, you got to give credit where it's due. The platform is incredibly prosperous and powerful for news media, and so he gets the nod.
Taking a look at the news TV talent of the year, in an election year, there are kind of plenty of opportunities for people to rise to the top, but it was clear. I think Brett Baer rose maybe above everybody else in that space.
Look, there were some really good ones in this category. Like I debated between Brett Baer and Gutfeld. Gutfeld had a really strong year. His TV show is doing really well. I think Bill Maher has done a lot of things with his program that he's generated a lot of attention off of a lot of the conversations he's had. You can't ignore CNN with Caitlin Collins and Jake Tapper. You know, Jake was involved in that first debate. I thought they did a really nice job on that debate overall. And then you have others too that, you know, like I love Brian Kilmeade. I think he works his tail off. He's all over television. He does really quality content. Lester Holt and Kristen Welker deserve recognition. But to me, I think Brett, first of all, he's a stable presence every night on television. His show always does well. But then you look inside of the election and, you know, I know he wasn't necessarily excited and proud of the conversation he had with Kamala Harris. He talked about it on a couple of interviews. But I thought it was a really important interview leading up to the election because up to that point, we really hadn't seen her challenged. And whether you liked her or didn't like her, you just wanted to learn more about her. And I thought he brought some of that out. And then you go to the election night coverage, and Fox did great on election night. And every big moment Brett Baer is in the middle of, and he doesn't get the attention maybe that, you know, everybody in the industry respects him and knows he's really good at what he does. But the louder, more, you know, personable talents like Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Jesse Waters, they're going to get the attention, Gutfeld. And yet there's Brett Baer consistently crushing it every single opportunity he gets. And so to me, it's a reflection on not only a great year, but also someone who's just incredibly consistent at delivering really good television.
I think you're right that you have to point out that, you know, in Fox News's biggest moments, it trusts Brett Baer to be the guy to handle those big moments, whether it's a Donald Trump interview, whether it's a Kamala Harris interview, election night, etc. You know, if they had gotten a presidential debate, it was going to be Brett Baer and Martha McCallum moderating the debate. So when you get the,
I'll say, you know, I think it's hilarious because some of the criticism Brett Baer gets is he's not too right wing enough for Fox News.
Right.
Exactly why I like him. I want balance. I want somebody who looks at issues from both sides, not just one side. And so, you know, look, he's right in the middle of the action whenever there's a big spot to have, and he always delivers.
Sticking in the news television space, the show of the year, what set the 5 over the top for you?
Ratings and just the formula. Like, and on top of that, look, that show has changed talent over the years and it keeps winning year after year. You know, Gutfeld and Dana Perino are pretty consistent. Jesse's been there a little while. But no matter who's on the show is always entertaining. It's always informative. And there's balance. Like you look at the show, Jessica Tarlov, they'll bring in Harold Ford. They give you both sides of the discussion. And, you know, I've always liked the formula. You know, people have their preferences on television programs. If you like just a strong voice who's got a strong opinion, you might like Hannity, Laura, or Jesse Waters. You might like, if you lean the other way, The View, right? And so there's, you know, Rachel Maddow, another one who's got a strong voice and opinion. To me, I just think the balance, the structure, and overall the results of the 5 are what set it apart.
It's really interesting. I think we've been programmed kind of to see if you see multiple people at a TV set that at some point we're going to be screaming at each other and pointing fingers, and it's just not what the 5 does at all. And it's borderline refreshing to see that they have, you know, like almost there's a kids table and then the adults table, and they're the adults table talking about the issues.
It's conversation about the things that people are talking about in their day-to-day lives that are important to their world, right? And so they offer different points of view, different personalities. They rotate people in and out. And I just think no matter what they do, the formula always works. And that's reflected by the viewership.
Moving to the radio side of things in the top of 2024, you have national hosts, you have local hosts. So a plethora of options for the News Talk Radio Host of the Year. But you chose Sid Rosenberg from 77 WABC in New York.
Well, look, the one thing I'll say about Sid, you know, he's got his fans and his critics, right? Because some people love his style, some people don't. The one thing he consistently does, which a lot of the people in this category are capable of and do, he cuts through the clutter. You look at the last year, he gets access on a local radio show to the president. He's right in the middle of the action when they're speaking in Washington, D.C. He's broadcasting live in Jerusalem. He's always behind WABC's local events out in the community, holding people accountable. And remember, it was just a few years ago, he lost his partner, right? And so Bernard McGurk goes away. It could have easily went the other way, where maybe the show's not as good. And instead, it continues to get stronger. And so I just respect the fact that Sid's got something to say all the time about everything. And sometimes you love that, especially in the world we're in, because he produces a lot of coverage, because he talks about media things. But he connects with people, and he strikes a chord and knows how to get through the clutter, if you will. And some of the others I had on this list, I think also do this well. Clay Travis, Megyn Kelly, Eric Erickson. I had Michael Berry on here, Dan Bongino on here. There's some really good talent out there that do it. I just think Sid had a really strong year, and that's, again, similar to some of the TV discussion we had. It's reflected by WABC's results. They had a really good year.
Yeah, when you look at some of their rating, I mean, what they're doing on an AM radio signal in 2024 is really impressive, and Sid Rosenberg kind of leads the way in Morning Drive there. That for all sorts of reasons, they should maybe not have the success that they're having, but because of the success of that morning show, things have gone really well for them in 2024.
Yeah, and you make a great point. The AM part also is a big factor. He's also, unlike Megyn, Clay, Eric, playing a one market,
right.
And which could work for him or against him, right? You could argue, hey, some of these other hosts are speaking to a larger audience, larger country. He's in New York City, where everything is under a microscope. You're expected to perform at a high level, and he's had competition from WOR, WINS, previously WCBS, which we'll get to later. And so all that being said, in a very crowded marketplace for news talk, he continues to pop.
Speaking of somewhat crowded marketplace, you have News Talk Radio Show of the Year, still local, still national. You have all sorts of options here. But Clay Travis and Buck Sexton had a really strong 2024 and are really hitting their stride here after stepping into the time slot previously held by Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, it's interesting. Last year, they were voted #1 News Talk national show by the voters in our B&M Top 20. That'll come out again next week. And I thought it was the first time we really start to see the industry professionals recognizing that, hey, yeah, maybe Rush isn't here, but we're going to be in good hands with these guys, at least from a content perspective and a growth perspective. They, similar to Sid, they cut through. I think they have really good chemistry. I think they get into a lot of different discussions, a lot of wide range on topics, which I think are really interesting. And let's not dismiss the most obvious. They reach a lot of different cities. They have massive distribution. And so when you have that much attention, look, if the show wasn't going well, believe me, Premiere would figure out another way, because there's too much at stake for it not to go well. Clay works his tail off, Buck works his tail off, and they've had a hit show since they stepped foot into the studio. And so, if anything, it's just a reflection that they continue to build on what they started, and it's only gotten better.
When you look at the digital show of the year, it's somewhat a similar crowded space now, where the joke, everybody's got a podcast, everybody's got maybe two podcasts, but there is one kind of 10,000-pound gorilla on the podcast block. And 2024 was maybe as big of a year as ever for Joe Rogan.
I wanted to come up with a reason to vote elsewhere, only for the fact that the obvious pick is Joe Rogan, right? But it's similar to what I said to Dave Green when we were talking about sports media, about local radio. I picked Felger and Maz at the Hub. And it's easy sometimes to look at, but they're successful. They've won it before, so why win it again? It's like, wait a second, I'm supposed to argue against someone who has the best show from a ratings and revenue standpoint in all of sports radio. Well, in this case, how do you argue the impact? Do you even, I did some homework on this. I'm looking at brands on YouTube, for example, right? And I see the New York Times, it's about 4 or 5 million. You've got strong brands like Megyn Kelly's done really well there. And some of these, you're at 3 to 5 million subscribers, which is awesome.
Right.
Then you go to Joe Rogan, 18.8 million. Then you look at what he does on X.
Well, his backup YouTube account has 9 million subscribers. Like,
literally, like, the man is sought out by everyone for his content. And remember, he's doing 3-hour shows. These, like, how many people could sit down with a guest for 3 hours, 2 hours, and keep them interesting? And, you know, and the thing is, he's not just political. He gets into all sorts of different stuff. And so from that standpoint, it's just a sheer success. I looked at, this is a really good category. Like, there's some really good digital shows. I think Tommy Lahren is fearless, is excellent. Jason Whitlock does a great job with The Blaze. Megyn Kelly has really done well in digital. Tucker Carlson, you know, obviously went on his own. He's done well. Keith Olbermann, the complete opposite perspective of a Tucker, but he pops in the space that he's in. I think Pivot with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway also do great. I'm a fan myself of the Young Turks. I think it's a really interesting and entertaining show. And then you can't ignore Pod Save America, New York Times Daily. There are a lot of really, really good shows. Ben Shapiro, of course. But when you look at that competition, I mean, any of them are good enough to win. And then you look at what they're up against, you know, they would all probably tip the cap as well and say, look, this guy dominates this category at a level that others just don't.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a couple of episodes this year that have tens of millions of views on YouTube, in addition to 14 million followers on Spotify, and that's before you get to Apple Podcasts and things like that. Joe Rogan, it's just it's so insanely impressive of what he's done in the podcast space, the digital space. But 2024 really kind of highlighted that for Joe Rogan. Kind of going to a different angle, the news media feud of the year in 2024. This one maybe has the most deserving finalist, because there are all sorts of, and especially in an election year, that kind of highlighted that. But Candace Owens versus Ben Shapiro really kind of defined 2024 in some aspects for both of them, for the Daily Wire and for Candace Owens.
Yeah, look, you can make a case, you know, Elon and Don Lemon had a beef because Don went to work there and then it didn't work out. Joe Rogan was going to sue The View, right? You had Megyn Kelly and Caitlin Collins, you know, going back and forth, which Megyn took issue with some things Caitlin said. Keith Olbermann versus everybody.
Yeah.
Keith loves to stir the pot with a lot of folks, and he usually does a good job of getting under their skin. But Candace versus Ben continued for a while. It ultimately led to Candace leaving the Daily Wire. You know, and they neither were backing down. I mean, the CEO of Daily Wire, Jeremy Boring, had to come in and weigh in that, hey, a brand like ours is going to support Candace's point of view, even if we disagree with it. She's now went on her own, is building her own digital platform, and she's got a big enough audience that she could probably do well in that space like many others have. But that, to me, when you look at just the sheer intensity of the feud, the stars involved in the feud, and how long it continued and what it led to, her leaving the brand, I think that one was hands down the winner.
In the news media hire category, 2024, like every other year, there's changes, there's hirings, firings, there are people moving up the ladder, etc. So again, lots of options on both TV and digital and radio. But when you take a look at the news media hire from your perspective, kind of off the wall selection here.
Yes, I went with Jon Stewart and the Daily Show. And for this reason, you know, when you think of Comedy Central, you think funny, right? most people don't think of that with Jon Stewart. They think very politically, charged. He's got his jokes, don't get me wrong,
Right.
but he did just come from Apple where he was doing The Problem, right? And he built the Daily Show, and he built it off of a lot of political commentaries. They hired him during an election year, which was going to help them overall. The show had lost its footing, I thought, over the last couple of years. And so him coming back, knowing that he was going to build a lot of the program around political point of view, I thought was a great hire by Comedy Central. And I think Stewart being on, whether he's there for another year or 2 years, who knows, right? The other thing I think that spoke to is this category didn't have as many big home run hires. Now, you can make a case, Brian Stelter returning to CNN, that's probably one that warrants consideration. Personally, I would probably go, if I had to pick someone else besides Jon Stewart, I would have probably went with KTAR in Phoenix. I thought Bruce St. James going to afternoons with Chad Gatos, with Larry Gatos. He was with Chad Benson. They've done a really strong job in that market in afternoons since, Bruce came on board. The hard part for me was, the station also added Chris Merrill during that time, and Chris and Joe have also done well. So how do I pick between two, right? And so, James Parker at BAP in Dallas, along with Carla Marion. You had Ray Stevens at WLS, who had left Kansas City. Uri, and I'm probably butchering that, Yuri Berliner, who was with NPR and then went to Free Press. We looked at, okay, we know him now because he spoke about this outspoken issue at NPR. But prior to that, I can't tell you that I was very familiar with a lot of his work. And so some of the others, like Geraldo Rivera, is a huge name, but he was hired to be a contributor on News Nation, not the same thing to me as hosting the Daily Show all day. Right. So that's where the rationale came into play with picking Stewart for this category.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, that he returns the Daily Show to a prominence that it hadn't had, and just by himself, because those are the clips that go viral. Those are the shows that people are watching. It's just a one night a week thing, but that's the one night a week people are watching the Daily Show. Looking at news media's most improved of the year, again, there are a lot of deserving folks in this that have seen their profile raised in 2024, but Chris Cuomo of News Nation gets that honor from you.
Yeah, I had on this list Rob Schmidt at Newsmax, Kat Timpf at Fox News, Tyrus at Fox News, Abby Phillip at CNN, and Kristen Welker at NBC News. I went with Cuomo because I'll tell you, when he was on CNN, I did watch him, and I've always liked him as a broadcaster. But at CNN, when he was there, I didn't really feel like I got a balanced point of view from Chris. This past year, I think his show on News Nation has been a home run. Some of the people he'll bring in Bill O'Reilly and Geraldo Rivera, different points of view. He'll bring
Stephen A. Smith,
right? So, and on top of that, if you just listen to Chris's his observations, his opinions, he's providing a lot broader point of view. And so I think he's done a great job on News Nation. And look, they're an upstart compared to some of the, brands that we've known forever, like CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. But with a leader like that in a key slot, you could start to make inroads. And if you look at what he's done over the last year, I think there's a reason they're optimistic that they're in a good space. And it starts with Cuomo, who I think has done a better show and is going to only continue. If they stick with this formula, I think they're going to continue to do well.
There have been some big news media digital companies that have grown up in the last couple of years, and they are fighting for space with some of the more well-established media entities. So you have kind of like the Daily Wire and the Blaze and Outkick fighting against Fox News and the New York Times and CNN in that digital space. So who takes that for you in the digital brand of the year?
Well, when it came to the digital brand of the year, I thought it was the New York Times. And I think you can make your argument for the Daily Wire, for Outkick. You could probably put the Hill in there if you wanted to. Yep. The Blaze does a great job. the thing about the Times, when I say digital, I think sometimes people think, oh, that means social. That doesn't just mean social.
Right.
YouTube, that means video. That means newsletters, which the New York Times is great at. That means podcasting, which the New York Times is great at. And so a lot of times I've said this forever about especially the last 5 years about the Times. People say the New York Times, they think newspaper. We got to stop doing that. They are one of the dominant outlets at newsletters, better than anybody. They are an incredible video brand. Go look at how many people subscribe to them on YouTube and watch their videos. They do better video than television does sometimes. And so podcasts, they're an audio program just like a news talk radio station, and they generate a lot of people listening to the Daily. And so to me, they're just a well-rounded machine when it comes to the digital space. And it's no knock on the others. I just think that they do things at a very different level than a lot of brands.
Now, you're right. The Daily is the top podcast behind the Joe Rogan Experience. Like it is not the top news pod. It is the top second highest podcast, period. So when you're doing that as a newspaper brand, it's an impressive feat that they have accomplished. When you look at the news media event of the year, there were lots of options during an election year with 2024 and the Republican National Convention, Democratic National Convention, and the shoulder kind of events that go off of that. But Charlie Kirk has still had a really strong year after year after year with his Turning Point USA tours.
Look, if you pick the RNC, then how did you not pick the DNC, right? To me, they cancel each other out. They're both big events. Media gets behind both. But those are really about politicians than they are about the media itself, right? The media wants the access. I thought Fox News did a great job with the Patriot Awards. It was a very entertaining presentation. Eric Erickson, who you and I both like and know, has done a really strong job with The Gathering over the last few years and bigger plans for it. Tucker Carlson's tour was well done. I mean, not only did it generate revenue because they had people come out and buy tickets and it was sold out, and he, tapped into his connections and showcased a lot of people, but they created a lot of content off of that. And so that was another good one. To me, the thing that separated Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA College tour is that how often do we hear people on television and you see advertisements run, the youth is the future. We need to involve them in the voting process. How many radio and television stations say, get out and vote? And they do all these fancy marketing campaigns. And we assume that's going to work, right? Charlie Kirk said, the hell with all that noise.
Right.
Go to where they actually are. You know what? I'm going to get in front of people and we're going to have a civilized debate. I'm going to warrant you don't like what I stand for. You don't like what I say. Get to the microphone, tell me why. And those conversations became incredible social content. He also tapped into his network of friends. You saw Vivek Ramaswamy at some of these really intelligent discussions with people. And what I loved about it is whether he swung someone's, vote or not, it made young people part of a process. And that to me is when you point to, is someone actually, putting their money where their mouth is, if you will, and leading change? Well, he's doing that. He's going on campuses, even some campuses that didn't want him there, right? And he's saying, look, you don't like my opinions, that's fine. I want to bring you into the loop. Let's have a discussion because this is our world that's in all of our hands, and we all need to be part of a process to make it better. And so really, really cool event. It obviously was very successful, and I thought the social content behind it was just outstanding.
In a kind of the opposite of the shocker of the year, there were a lot of news media shockers in 2024, but none more maybe than WCBS 880 in New York going off the air after almost 60 years in the all news format.
You're right that there were a lot. When Comcast revealed that they were going to spin off MSNBC and CNBC, I was shocked by that. Neil Cavuto exiting Fox News, didn't have that on my bingo card for 2024. The Washington Post didn't endorse a candidate, and then Jeff Bezos wrote an op-ed explaining why, which I read it. I thought his rationale was really sound. You don't have to agree, but I liked what he pointed out. Um, look, I don't think this was as much of a shocker, even though it became, not a great moment for ABC with their handling of the debate between Trump and Biden that generated a lot of reaction. But I think a lot of people who went into that debate, expected there would be some noise because Trump likes to go after the media at every opportunity he gets. Daily Wire leaving Westwood One. Did not see that coming when you broke that story. I hadn't heard noise about that a month early.
Right.
So that came out of nowhere. NBC hired and then dropped RNC chairwoman Rona McDaniel. That, was over, started and ended before anything else happened. It was gone in like 60 seconds. Robin Bertolucci exiting KFI and the significant cuts that came to KFI were a close second here because, we do this top 20 every year. KFI is strong across the board. And when you see a station like that being, just totally changed overnight, obviously business comes into play with some of these things. I don't know their balance sheet. And so I'm sure there was reason behind it, but it still doesn't mean I like it or that I understand it because Robin and the crew that she led at KFI were really powerful. However, when WCBS 880 shuts down and goes away after, what was it, 100 years? I mean, that station was around forever. And it was part of just the culture of New York City. You knew WCBS. I'm a New Yorker. I know what that brand means in New York. And so, if you are looking at it from the Odyssey point of view going forward the next 10 to 20 years, if you believe there's greater growth in wins, and you thought basically we have two brands competing for the same audience and revenue, I can understand why. That said, it was, wow, I did not expect that at all. I mean, a lot of great talent on that brand. I was glad to see some of them have landed in situations since, whether it be Michael Wallace or Steve Scott or, there's a couple others there that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But nonetheless, that was, and I'm sure when you saw the story unfolding, you were sitting there with your jaw open the same way I was, right?
Yeah. So it pops up that like, hey, Good Karma Brand and Odyssey have struck a deal to move ESPN New York to 880. And that was like, ESPN New York is moving to 880. Like, well, wait a second. That means WCB. What's happening to WCBS? And that was kind of like, by the way, WCBS will cease operations on August 25th. And like, well, wait a second. That's the story, not that ESPN New York is. It's that WCBS is signing off, and it was a shocking story. And to the, there's a 1010 news. The 1010 wins. It's all news. WCBS. It's all news. And to see the amount of people that would say, well, I don't like the way 1010 wins does there. I prefer WCBS. And it was like, to me, who had not been exposed to really either of the brands all that much, it was interesting to see the reaction of how much goodwill and passion people had for WCBS, and that it gave you kind of a little bit of hope that like, hey, there are still people who really passionately listen to the radio, consume the content, understand all of those things. And for it to just kind of up and vanish in a 2-week period. And I think kudos to Odyssey for having hey, we can't just pull the plug on this thing. Like, we have to do something. We have to do a farewell. We have to do this. For them to do that, I think spoke volumes about the brand of WCBS before it reached its demise.
They did that because Chris Olivero leads that cluster, and Chris Olivero is class. Okay. I can't tell you they would have done that with somebody else. I don't know if they would. I think they probably would because it's just the right thing to do. But I know someone like Chris Olivero wouldn't make that mistake to not do it the right way, because no matter what, the brand going away is going to be a big blow. A lot of people are going to be, questioning things, but he at least tries to show decorum in the way he handles things, which is opposite of what you pointed out. Like when a press release comes out, Good Karma celebrating that they're going to 880, that I understand. That's what they should do. When it comes from the company side, though, inside of Odyssey, that's not a moment to go, we're really pumped up that we did a deal with 880. No. You can do that tomorrow. Start today by telling people we've got some news to share that we, wish we didn't have to. However, we've made a tough decision. And that's how Chris handled it, which is why he's such an exceptional leader and, just well respected across the industry. But I mean, that was a massive, massive head scratcher at the time.
Right.
The more things started to wear off, you go, yeah, I mean, I get it from a business standpoint. There aren't many media markets that have two news stations, let alone run by the same group. And then here was the fitting thing, and this is the last thing I'll say on it. I think it's really interesting that a radio company purchased CBS Radio. What was that, 2016, 2017? Yeah. Which at the time had WCBS on AM and FM, still has FM. That's the one exception. But had CBS Sports Radio too, and now doesn't have WCBS AM or CBS Sports Radio. It's almost like they've said, we're going to move ourselves away from this CBS identity. And so, look, for whatever reason, if they see bigger upside with Wins, and I'm sure they have their reasons for it, Wins is a pretty powerful brand in New York.
Right.
CBS. And so, it's like picking between your two favorite kids. It's really difficult to do that. But in the end, they had to make a business decision. And, kudos to CBS for all they accomplished over the years, but sad to see them go.
In the News Media Pundit of the Year category, and by the way, you can see all of these picks from the news media side, the sports media side at barrettmedia.com. The News Media Pundit of the Year, I think your choice of Scott Jennings was a really good one, because I don't know that anybody in the news television space from the contributor/analyst side saw their star rise more in 2024 than Scott Jennings did.
It's interesting. I was looking at this category, when I was putting it together, and I really started to take notice of Scott's work this past year. And maybe it's because the election, you're looking for a lot more opinions from a lot of different people. But I didn't realize he had been there as long as he's been. It's been, 6-7 years. And so to that point of what you just brought up, I thought, well, why am I noticing it more now? Well, he's really interesting and entertaining on CNN. He's in which is probably built for him in a good way. He goes into the lion's den, right? Abby Phillip and company, they don't necessarily see it the way Scott does. And so it becomes really compelling television. And so I think especially not only is it good television, they have done a really strong job of turning around a lot of his opinions for social.
Yeah.
And those have really done well. I had others on this list. I think Jessica Tarlov does the same thing that Scott does, but for Fox, right? I think Kaylee McEnany, Tommy Lahren, Clay Travis, Bill O'Reilly, Geraldo Rivera, Van Jones, they all are good pundits that play their roles on television and do them really well. You may not like them, you may disagree with the points they make, but they're there and that they're going to get your attention. But this year, I thought we saw a lot more of people going, this Scott Jennings guy is getting my attention. And I think it speaks to, he's on a show that sets him up to get into some things with people, which is good strategy by CNN. I think, even if some of the cast don't like his opinions on the show, they're hopefully smart enough to recognize, like, look, he's bringing audience in here that we may not otherwise have. And on top of it, he's just good. He's got things to say and sound logic behind his points of view, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. And so I thought he overall had a really good year.
One to watch in 2025. And there are some familiar names here that could have been selected that we've talked about in past categories. But Tommy Lahren is poised to see her star rise in 2025. In your mind, what makes you think that she's the one in a crowded category?
Yeah, I think she's outstanding on camera. I think she's incredibly bright, passionate. The one thing that she's gotten really good at, she could do her long form content for Outkick, but she's really good in short form content too. If they give her 30 seconds to talk, she usually says something that cuts through. I know Fox like her a lot, have bigger plans for her. And I think that you'll see that continue. Her talent is incredible. And so you have a young, passionate, smart, outspoken, well-read, attractive woman on camera who plays really good to a Fox News audience. And on top of that, Fox is going to have to continue to evolve and put new people in bigger spots. She's already on there. She does things across Fox and Outkick, but I think that'll continue to increase. I think you could also make a case like I was just talking before about Scott Jennings as the pundit of the year. To me, if I'm at CNN, I'm looking at how do we get him involved in a bigger show, and so he might have a case there. I think Eric Erickson on the radio side, Cox got behind him in a bigger way this year. And they put him on in Tulsa and Jacksonville, their own stations, where they had other local options in the past. And I think with Westwood One losing some of the Daily Wire affiliations, I know they're pushing Guy Benson, but as you know, when you're in local markets, some people are going to want this show from Guy. Some are going to want a different host from Radio America. Some are going to want a premiere show or an Eric show. And so I think Eric is just poised to have continued growth because he does a really good show. And on top of that, the others that I had on this list, I think Chad Benson has that same argument at Radio America. Mm-hmm. You saw him get added in Nashville and Dallas this year with his show. I think Jessica Tarlov on TV, similar to Tommy and to Scott Jennings. I think, Fox is probably going to look at her to do some more. Because she does a really nice job cutting through. And then Rob Schmidt on Newsmax and Rob Finnerty at Newsmax, both of them have started to really make some inroads there, which has got to make Chris Ruddy happy. So I think that's a really good category. I just think Tommy is built to have the next 5 years become a really big platform for her, provided, Fox starts getting behind, giving her more run on TV. But I think that's coming. She is too good to not have a bigger platform in the near future. They're going to see a lot of eyeballs watching her content, and they're going to generate a lot of revenue with her on TV.
So that's a look at the best of 2024 from the eyes of Barrett Media President Jason Barrett. You can read all the best of 2024, the sports media side, the news media side at barrettmedia.com. That will do it for the news media side here from Barrett Media.